So we're going to move on to section 2 of the course now, and in this section of the course we're focusing on part 1 of the speaking test, often called the interview stage. And this lecture, lecture 5, is going to be all about how you get started in your answers in part 1, the importance of getting off to a good start. So let's talk about that just to begin with, the importance of making a strong start in your answers to the questions that you are posed. Let's have a look at 2 answers to begin with. These are 2 answers to the same question, and I want you to think about which answer is stronger. So let's have a look at the question. Very simple. Do you enjoy your job, and why or why not? So but why is answer 2 stronger? Let's think about that. If we look at it on its own, answer 2 here, yes, I do, I enjoy it a lot. What we can see is that the answer is a lot more confident to start with. It doesn't trip over itself. It's in command of its own language. And this is possible because it isn't afraid to use the language in the question. Now, this is a very important point. Some tutors, some teachers may tell you that you should try to avoid using the language from the question as much as possible. This is wrong. It's not natural to avoid language in the question. If your friend or an acquaintance were asking you a question, it would be natural for you to use some of the same language, and that is exactly what we want to put across in part 1. Part 1 should be sort of like speaking to a friend or someone you are close to. And as a result, we should try to be as natural as possible. So the words do and enjoy are in the question. So we'll use the words do and enjoy very naturally in the answer. That will give you a strong start. And as a result, that accurate opening will give you the confidence to think of an extra idea to add on the end. So use the language and grammar in the question to help you make a strong start. Do not worry about repetition, at least when you are opening your response. Just make sure to answer the question directly and then develop it with 1 or 2 points. So we're going to look into this technique in a bit more detail in this lecture now. So some example questions here. Do you like to travel? How long have you lived in a complicated answer? This is one I hear quite a lot. The question of whether I am a fan of travelling or prefer staying homebound is not a simple one to which I can respond. Journeying to exotic nations, da-da-da-da-da-da. So this is unlikely to come out of the mouth of a candidate, but something like this is something I often hear as a teacher. People just trying to do far too much with the language to show off their range of vocabulary. And while this can sometimes be effective in part 3, it is totally out of context and out of place in part 1. So you do not need this overcomplicated vocabulary. Let's look at the second question. How long have you lived in your home? Now, the get to the point answer. Well, that's a very good question. So, well, actually, I guess it would be around about, more or less, get to the point. Okay, so some teachers again will recommend this as an actual technique, and it's awful. It's so transparent. If you begin your answer this way, it's very evident to the examiner that you are stalling for time. Language that's a little bit similar to this can be used in part 3, but do try to avoid it in part 1. If you need to say something, expressions like well are fine, but try not to do any more than that. Question 3. Who did the cooking in your family when you were a child? This is the overly brief answer. My mother, or my mother cooked. End. This is not enough. You're not demonstrating any of your vocabulary or grammar or fluency. Question 4. How popular are bicycles in your town? Now, the irrelevant answer. Well, the most popular form of transport is cars. There are cars everywhere in my city. They cause so much traffic. It's fine with the vocabulary, with the grammar, with the pronunciation, but it's very much not answering the question, and that could have an impact on your score. Question 5. What are you studying at the moment? Now, this is the repetitive answer. English is the subject I am studying at the moment, so I am studying English at the present time. This is actually quite a common response, and I'm not sure whether candidates realise they are doing it. But it's essentially a case of you don't know what to say, and so you repeat the same thing in slightly different vocabulary. Try to notice when you're doing this, try to stop it, and think about how you can develop your idea, which we'll be looking at a little bit later in this lecture. What often happens is that at the beginning of the lesson, I have a little chat with them. And when they're talking to me, super natural. It's fine. It's really good. As soon as we come into like a question answer format in IELTS, they suddenly change their vocabulary to try to make it a little bit more advanced. Do not do this. Just be natural. If you struggle with natural vocabulary, then try to immerse yourself in more English by watching movies and listening to podcasts and listening to conversations on YouTube and things like that. But just try to avoid creating this artificial, overly flowery language when you give your answers in part 1. Now, having looked at some bad starts, let's have a look at some good starts and some good answers overall. The first thing I want you to do is to look at these questions and try to pick out the language that you would use out words like these. Now let's see how they can be used in our responses. Way for me to satisfy this curiosity. You don't have to use all of the language. Notice we changed like to love, but don't hesitate too much to use this language. How long have you lived in your home? I've lived in my current home for about the last 3 years. I moved to this place from London, the capital, when I was in my late 20s because I was getting tired of city life. Again, we're using quite similar language. Who did the cooking in your family when you were a child? My mum did the cooking when I was a child. I've never really thought about why, but I guess at the time it was just traditional gender roles for mums to cook and dads to work, rather than the other way around. They use it to get themselves off to a good start, and they use that good start as a platform to help develop the original idea. Now, let's think about that development in this final start, continuing your answer. Now, I've highlighted in green here all the language which is used to develop our original idea. And each of these types of development is development to help you answer maybe 6 questions yourself. Okay, let's have a look. So the first one, this would be an example of just simply giving a reason. You just add a because. Now, this is often prompted by the examiner anyway, when they say why or why not. So we're giving a reason because I'm really curious. The second one, just a bit of extra detail. You're not asked for it, but it just helps to make sure that your language isn't too short, too brief, and you're able to demonstrate your vocabulary and your fluency. The third one uses speculation. So something that you're not sure The fourth one uses a comparison. Now we return to the idea of cars like before, but this time we make it relevant because we're comparing cars to bicycles. That's something that you can do when you're asked about the popularity of things. The fifth one is an element of time detail. So we just give a bit more context by adding a time there. This helps us to kind of mix up the tenses as well, which we'll look at later. And the final one, it just gives an example. This technique is often useful when we're asked about preferences, and again it gives us a good opportunity to just quickly switch between tenses. In the previous lecture we talked about getting off to a good start, and that's very important for confidence, which in turn gives us our fluency and coherence, which is 25% of the band descriptors. Another 25% of the band descriptor score that you get will be for lexical resource, and that's what we're going to focus on in this lecture. Lexical resource is about your range of vocabulary, and if you want to show your range of vocabulary, what you should not do is repeat words too often. This lecture is all about avoiding this repetition. So, if we look at the band descriptors, we can learn why paraphrasing is so important. Language. Repetition demonstrates a lack of flexibility with language, and that word flexibility is very important because it comes up in the band descriptors if we look at them here. Band 7 uses vocabulary flexibly to discuss a variety of topics, and Band 6 has a wide enough vocabulary to discuss topics at length and make meaning clear in spite of inappropriacies. As you can see, to even score a band 6, you need to have a somewhat wide range of vocabulary, but we're aiming for a 7, so we need to use this vocabulary to discuss a variety of topics. Now, let's have a look at a couple of examples to see why this is so important. Would you rather live in a hot place or a cold place? You may want to pause this video just for a moment to practice this answering this question, and compare it to the 2 answers that I'm going to put on the screen in a moment. Okay, so first answer. I think I would rather live in a hot place. I like hot weather, so a hot place would suit me. It's quite hot where I live, so I like where I live. Or, personally, I'd rather live in a hot place. I'm happiest of particular expressions. It is not overly dependent on particular words, like the first one is, as we can see here. We have rather live, which appears twice, and we have the word hot, which appears 4 times and also appears in the question itself. With this second answer, you can see that we've paraphrased. We still have rather live and hot, like I recommended in the last lecture. We use that vocabulary, but we paraphrase with synonyms and different ways of saying the same thing. So we've got warm, we've got the temperature gets pretty high, and we've got I'd be happy stay. Paraphrasing in the writing test. When you're speaking, you don't have the time to go through all the synonyms you know or all the different ways you know of paraphrasing. In the writing test, you have that time. You get to sit there and you get to think about it. You can take that moment. But with the speaking, you're on the spot. As a consequence, it's all about preparation when it comes to the speaking. So here are the do's and do nots of paraphrase practice in speaking. And like I say, it's going to be all about preparation. So what we do want to do is play the IELTS word association game, which I'm going to teach you in a moment. We're going to play the 1-minute topic card game. Again, I'm going to teach you that in a moment. You're going to have conversations in English. Listen to talks on a variety of topics, and TED.com is a really good resource for this, as well as a few YouTube channels like The School of Life and Vsauce. Read, read, read. I always recommend reading, even though we're talking about the speaking. Still very, very useful to learn new words and new ways of saying the same things. And of course, practice regularly. What should you not do? Well, do not try too hard to demonstrate your range. Otherwise, you'll end up like the overcomplicated candidate or the exam voice candidate that we talked about in the previous lecture. Do not take really long pauses when trying to find the perfect word, or do not try to use that language that stalls for time. Don't use too much well, all that sort of language there. And do not, of course, repeat the same words over and over. We're trying to avoid repetition. Now in this lecture, we're mostly going to focus now on 2 of these do's, and they are the 2 games that I have highlighted above. We're not going to look at lots of different vocabulary, so do not get the idea that we're going to do that. That is too vast a topic for us to cover in this express course for the speaking test, but I am going to post some links at the end of this video Now this game is typically played with 2 or more people, but it can be played alone for practice purposes. The typical form of this game is that you would take a word, any word, for example, the word hot in would you rather live in a hot place or a cold place, and then you would take it in turns, you and the other player, to say the first word that comes to your head related to the last word that was said. So that you can turn it into an answer to a question once you've finished. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of how this would work in practice. Let's look at the one that we've just talked about, the word hot. Would you rather live in a hot place or a cold place? So we started with the word hot, and if you're playing alone, then you would say the first word that comes to your mind after you said the word hot. Or if you're playing with a friend, then they would say the first word that would come to their mind. And you would end up with potentially a string of words that looks like this. hot, warm, high temperature, summer, beach, sunshine, sunbathing, swimming, ocean. Okay? And then you would take these words and you would try to turn them in to an answer, ideally by saying them out loud rather than writing them down, but you can write them down if you need to. But you try to turn these words into an answer to the question that you posed initially. Would you rather live in a hot place or a cold place? I'd rather live in a warm place. I love the high temperatures in summer. Some of my favourite things are sunbathing at the beach, swimming in the ocean, and enjoying the sunshine. Now notice how much vocabulary that is using. You're forced through the constraints of the game to turn those words into a legible answer. And it sounds quite good. So let's have a look at another example. Shopping. Do you enjoy shopping? Why or why not? So I use the word shopping to get the game started, and we can go with a string of words like with my credit card, and coming out with loads of shopping bags. I'm really into fashion, so I'm always buying clothes, particularly when they're on sale. Notice we've changed the formation of some of these words and we've also changed the order, and that is absolutely fine. Did you enjoy most of school? So we start with the word school subjects and we go mathematics, equations, sums, logic, teacher, homework, calculator, and we can end up with an answer like this. The subject I enjoyed most was probably mathematics, maybe because working out equations and sums with logic was simple for me. And we had a great teacher too. And the homework was usually easy because you could just use your calculator. Now, these answers are quite long. Your answers don't need to be as long as this, particularly in part 1, but this is a great way to practice using varied vocabulary when speaking about a range of topics. It is all about preparation when it comes to paraphrasing. It's not about being in the moment because you don't have the time in the speaking test. It's all about the preparation. Played alone if necessary. You need a little bit of preparation here. So what you do is you take a number of cue cards, and on each of the cue cards you write down a topic. For example, sport, or family, or summer. You shuffle those cards timer. Now, speak about that topic. The aim here is to talk about the topic for a whole minute without stopping and without any preparation. Have your friend take notes . Anything at all related to home you speak about for 1 minute, recording yourself or getting your friend to take notes. You finish that one, you turn it over. You get the next one, and that one says television, and you speak about television for a minute. Finish that one, turn it over, find the next card, and that is sports, and you talk about sports for a minute. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep going until you run out of cards. Now, if you find this a little bit too easy, then feel free to increase the difficulty by adding an extra minute for each topic. You might even like to do it halfway through. One particular variation of the game that's quite tricky but quite fun as well is that you increase move to colors, and that'd be 1 minute and 30 seconds and so on. And you can play around with this game to whatever matches your ability level. And over time, you should feel more and more confident speaking about a variety of topics, even ones you were not initially so confident talking about. So those are two ways that we can prepare for paraphrasing. But as I said, if you want to specifically improve your topic related vocabulary and learn exact words and expressions related to these topics, then I recommend looking at a couple of different books that are designed for this purpose. The problem in this course is that it's publication. So the same group that creates your IELTS exam have put out this book, and that is Vocabulary for IELTS Advanced by Pauline Cullen. And Pauline Cullen also does a very good book on grammar for IELTS as well. Both of these books come highly recommended by me and have been lauded by my students as well, so I can definitely recommend those. And finally, of course, Udemy courses. There are a couple of Udemy courses online that specifically focus on IELTS topic vocabulary, but there are also many topics that focus on vocabulary in general related to different topics. So I definitely recommend checking those out. Whatever you decide to do, make sure that you do try to improve your vocabulary either by reading regularly, checking out videos related to different topics, practicing the two games that I've mentioned here, or specifically checking out the books that I've mentioned above. And you can check these out by clicking the links that I've provided in the resources section of this video. Now we've talked a little bit about vocabulary, let's talk about grammar. Grammatical range and accuracy, and the 25% of your mark that comes from that band descriptor category. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about identifying the question, in particular the grammar in the question, and how we can use it to deliver an accurate response. So, listening for grammar. As we've seen, thinking about the examiner's choice of vocabulary is very important. So we can use that vocabulary to help us give a strong start. This is equally true of the examiner's grammar. It's really important to pay attention to the examiner's grammar. Now notice the difference between these two questions. Do you enjoy traveling? Have you done much traveling recently? Now, you can see that each of these questions has been given in a different tense. The first one model answer that I'm going to put up on the screen here using the verbs that I write down on the screen in their appropriate form. So you've got to think about the tense that the verbs should appear in. Now the question is, did you enjoy your time at school? And the answer we have here, you can see on the screen. Now I want you to fill in the gaps of this answer using these verbs here in the appropriate form. So, yes, I did. Did you enjoy your time at school? Did you enjoy? Yes, I did. My teachers were fantastic. So we're using the be verb in the past form for a plural subject, so we have it as were. My teachers were fantastic, really helpful, and I had. So we're moving have to the past. Everything here is in the past because we're talking about school and the question is in the past. And I had a lot of enthusiasm for my subjects. Looking back, I feel grateful. Now you may have tripped up on this one, understandable. We'll look at that in a moment. I feel grateful that I went to a school where students and teachers respected one another. So, as I mentioned, this verb feel is very important here. We've actually deliberately used this verb feel so that we can bring in grammatical range. So for grammatical accuracy, we respond to the question in the appropriate tense, and for grammatical range, because that's what it's all about, it's grammatical range and accuracy, the band descriptor title, we need to look for opportunities to include a different tense, but in an appropriate time. So it's appropriate to say I feel grateful because that's the feeling right now. To be honest, in the past, often kids are not grateful about the school they go to. They just think of it as school and they have to go in. But when you're an adult in the present moment, you feel grateful that that happened, past tense, to you. So here we have the past simple as expected from us in the question, but we've also found an opportunity to increase grammatical range by adding the present simple. Now, let's look into this in a bit more detail. You can think of this as time travel, if you want to be a little bit mystical about it. So sometimes changing tenses is the natural and obvious approach, such as with this question here. Have you ever been to an art gallery? Now, you may want to answer this one yourself, just for a moment, before you have a look at my answer, which is going to come up on the screen now. Yes, I have. I've been to a few. I last went perfect to answer the initial yes/no question. So identifying the question and using the grammar from it to get started in our response. We then naturally move into the past simple. It's quite a natural progression here. It'd be a bit strange to stay in the present perfect to offer a bit more detail. But notice that we've also found an opportunity to include the past continuous too. The gallery was running. That takes a little bit more thought and consideration. Let's keep going. So another question here. Other times you may need to think outside the box for an opportunity to include another tense, or two, or even three. Of course, it's usually just going to be one or opportunity to bring in more tenses. Now let's have a look at my answer. Oh, it's hard to say. I like lots of different genres of music. Rock, classical, hip hop, pop. I used to listen to country, but I'm not really a fan of that anymore. Right now, I'm listening to a lot of classical music. So here, again, we've identified the question which uses the present simple. We use the present simple to open simple and saying, I like this, but I don't like this. That's fine, but it's not going to demonstrate your grammatical range. Notice that the present continuous here, that may look a little bit strange to you. I'm listening to a lot of classical music, because it usually means right at this moment. And of course you wouldn't be doing that in the exam. But we often use this to talk about a period which may change in the near future. So again, that temporary state. So I'm listening to a lot of classical music now, but maybe in a few Let's look at some possible dangers or risks that could arise when we use this strategy. You need to be careful to avoid changing tenses at inappropriate times or in an inaccurate way. These are the two have one particular friend or a group of friends. Again, you might consider how you would answer this question. Now let's look at my response. Personally, I prefer to have one friend. I used to have had loads of friends, but we weren't very close, and that was tiring. Now I have just a couple of really good friends, which has been much better. Hopefully you've noticed a couple of problems with this answer. Now the first problem is a problem of inaccuracy. The used to form here is inaccurate. It should be I used to have loads of friends, not I used to have had. And the other problem instead of which has been much better, we should be saying which is much better. Yes, the present simple is a little bit simpler than the present perfect, but it's still appropriate. It's not about the complexity all the time, it's about how appropriate a tense is. Okay, let's talk about the most common mistake that I hear when students try this. And that is the candidates will often use the present tense when they're being asked a question about the past. Has your fashion changed since you were a child? Now you can see this one's a little bit trickier because you've got that present perfect mixed up with the past simple. But have a go with this one again. When you've finished, listen to my answer, which I'm going to play you now. Yes, I think it has changed. When I was young, I always wear baggy jeans and bright and colourful t-shirts, but these days I am wearing more form-fitting clothes with muted colours. Now, as you can see, hopefully, there are a couple of problems with this answer, problems that are very, very typical of the Both of these problems are related to tense and they use the same verb. How would you fix them? What do you think the correction should be here? It should be, I always wore. Not I am wearing. Should be I wear. Okay, so this is the most common mistake that comes up. So when you are asked a question that has an element of the past about it, I want a little signal to go off in your brain that says, be careful not to use the present at an inappropriate time. Okay, you've got to stay in the past unless it's appropriate to move out of it. A little bit of practice for you before we finish up. Here's a question where you should be able to use what we've learnt. Remember, the first thing to do is identify the tense. Make sure you open your response in that tense and then see if you can bring in one or two other tenses. So a great question to practice this is this one. Has anyone ever taught you to dance? So try answering this now. Lessons. Having said that, I was just dancing last week at my friend's wedding, though I'm a terrible dancer as my balance is awful. Okay, so what tenses am I using here? Notice we're identifying the question, we're using the present perfect, and so therefore that's what's going to appear at the beginning here. No, they haven't. I don't think I've ever had. Okay, now let's bring in a couple more tenses. We're going to use the past continuous, I was dancing, and we're going to bring in the present simple. I'm a terrible dancer, my balance is awful. So try using this strategy of identifying the grammatical accuracy. So we can turn those weaknesses into strengths. So let's talk about the importance of pronunciation. It's very important that you speak as clearly as possible. And really should not have an impact on your score. So if you feel like you have a strong accent, don't worry too much. That shouldn't have an impact. But what will have an impact on your score? The pronunciation of individual sounds. That includes consonants and vowels. Word stress. Speed. Sentence stress. And intonation. These are all slightly different. Just a quick word on speed before we look at the focus of to the exam. If you speak too quickly, you risk your words being blurred and mumbled and unclear. In fact, you can hear right now that I'm speaking quite slowly, but you can tell that I'm a native speaker. Now, before we begin, I want to give you a couple of pieces of advice and I want you to follow these through. With all the sounds we look at, I want you to exaggerate these sounds, like I'm doing here. Exaggerate the sounds. That may not feel so natural at the beginning, but if you struggle with particular sounds, exaggerate them to begin with, then over time they will soften and become a bit more natural. Pronounce very slowly. Now this here, notice the changes in the tension of your muscles, the mouth shape, the tongue position, and etc. And make sure to give your jaw a massage when it's over. It can cause a little bit of a much, but a lot of people have the problem of not being able to pronounce thing, thief, or both correctly. This is an unvoiced sound. The most common mispronunciation here is to pronounce this sound as a d or a t, like ting or ding for thing, bat or bad for bath, or dif or tif for thief. The trick here is in the positioning of your tongue and how you use your breath. Now, what I want you to do is stick your tongue far out of your mouth, put it all the way out, like you're sticking your tongue out at someone. Now hold your tongue between your teeth. Now breathe through your teeth, which are clamping down on your tongue. This should be creating right now the unvoiced th sound. Now say the word thank you, and say it a couple of times. Thank you. Often appear when people attempt this sound. Instead of sticking your tongue far out for this one, try sticking it out just a little bit, and then imagine the sound of a buzzing bee. This will help you to vibrate your tongue. And now say the word there. So what you should notice is that the tongue is just a little bit out of the mouth, but still between the teeth, but not clamped quite so hard because you need that room for vibration. And then think of the buzzing bee and you'll have that th sound. And we'll say the word there. Now, let's try this tongue twister. First of all, try it on your own, see if you can get it. And now listen to me say it here. Although they thought of these things here, they gathered both of those things there. It's quite a lot of voiced TH in that tongue twister, but also a couple of unvoiced THs. Okay, let's move on. Another very common issue is the L sound that appears in words like long and light and belly. And you may already know who I'm talking about here. This U you need to press the tip of your tongue against the roof of your mouth. So just behind the teeth, but not on the teeth, but on the roof of your mouth. Push air through your mouth and then flick the tip of your tongue forward. Now your lips should not be moving at all as you produce this sound, so try to keep them stationary. Try the word click, click, And as mentioned there, pronounce it very slowly and try to exaggerate it. It should not sound like crick, but click. You can hear that flicking of the tongue on the top of the mouth there. Click, click. Okay. Now the other sound, of course, is the r sound in words like wrong. Your tongue should not be touching anything. So with the l sound, the tongue touches the roof of the mouth. With the r sound, the tongue should not touch anything. Press the mid/back of your tongue against the insides of the top teeth. So I guess the tongue is touching something, but don't touch the tip of your tongue against anything. But yes, the mid or back of your tongue should kind of round up against the insides of your top teeth. Now, round your lips. Think of the word round. The word round begins with a round lip. As you can. Okay, final consonant sound issue here, common one, is the w sound. This is the w sound in words like west, worse, and rowing. This pronunciation feature is often difficult for German, Eastern European, Indian speakers, Turkish sometimes, and commonly confused with the v sound, which we're going to look at in a moment. Now with this sound, you need to shape your lips into a kissing gesture. And don't worry, there are other Udemy courses to teach you those kind of skills. I'm just teaching you here how to pronounce this sound. So the trick here is to push air through your mouth while making lips in a kissing gesture, top teeth away from bottom lip, and say the word weird, weird. If it sounds like weird, then you're doing it wrong and you need to take your top teeth away. So weird, weird, weird. As I say, this sound is often confused with the w sound, but the trick here is simply to stick your front teeth out over your bottom lip, like Bugs Bunny. If you imagine Bugs Bunny, you can imagine those front teeth coming down over the bottom lip there. Then breathe through your mouth with your teeth in this position and say the word very. Very. Again, exaggerate this. Stick your teeth out really far over the front of your bottom lip, and this should make it a very easy sound. There is no need to purse your lips here. You can come away from that kissing gesture. Very. The tongue twister here. Have a go. I'll show you how it's done. She had very weird, vicious wishes that the worst would happen to the versed men. These very weird, vicious wishes made the versed men very wary that the worst would happen. Okay, that's a tricky one even for me, so have a go with that one. Now, having looked at some consonants, let's just have one brief look at a common issue that comes up with vowels, because this is an issue which sometimes gets people into trouble depending on the word that they pick. So, the first sound here, this little symbol, is for the works better here, because essentially we need to tense our facial muscles. So it's not a weak yearbook photo smile, hardly anything there, but a wide and cheesy grin. So tense these facial muscles, pull the lips as wide as you can, and say the word cheese. So tense those muscles. Cheese, cheese, cheese. Okay? A good way to check if you're getting this right is to place your finger under your chin. You'll feel the muscles there tense up if you're pronouncing this correctly. If you're pronouncing it like chis, then you won't feel those muscles. And that's the sound that we're going to look at here. The I sound in words like bit instead of beat, ship instead of sheep, and rich instead of your tongue behind your bottom teeth. And now say the word win, win. And you are now winning at speaking, winning at speaking. So you can practice that there. Final tongue twister. Strict vegans eat beet chips with bean dip and keep meat and fish dishes out of reach. Try saying that tongue twister with your finger under your chin. Vital that you acknowledge and recognize your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. I can't do that for you. I can't do that from where I'm sitting unless you choose to take some lessons with me, of course, or one of the teachers on the IELTS Teacher. So to help you with recognizing your weaknesses, record yourself speaking for 1 minute, even if you just read an extract from a book, and then pass this recording to either an English teacher who's willing to help you, or a native friend or an acquaintance, and ask them to point out to you any pronunciation difficulties that you have. And once you are armed with that knowledge and you have identified your weak spots, you can use these tools to help you to improve in these areas. The first one is a pronunciation app from the education group Macmillan, and the app is called Sounds. It was developed with one of the experts on English pronunciation, and I can tell you that it's a very, very good app if you struggle with those sounds. And personal tuition, pronunciation coaching. This is, of course, the best way to go if you can do it, but you can still make huge strides forward in your pronunciation even without this extra element of pronunciation.